We have natural fears about our obligations, a concern for our dependents, worries over the young, and, in large, worry about the whole world. These worries and fears have come to be regarded as indicative of the serious person. An individual without anxieties today would be regarded with suspicion. It would be assumed that he was not taking life with proper seriousness. There's a great deal of difference, however, between a thoughtful, serious approach to life and the building up of these banks of fears or agitations, which generally reflect adversely on our conduct and therefore contribute to the complications of living. That in order to develop a really thorough case of anxiety, it is not only important to have troubles, it is equally important to have a certain measure of aloneness in which to nurse the troubles. It is more difficult to be in a state of anxiety when surrounded by interesting, happy people or important events. Thus, the anxious person usually builds his anxieties during periods in which he is alone. One of the most common, of course, is one of those tossing, restless nights, in which nearly always we can work up a negative attitude on something. Another type, of course, is the chronic anxiety of the person who lives alone. And the equally difficult type of anxiety that comes to a person who may live with others, but who has cultivated a strong sense of isolation. There are persons who live in consistent and constant mingling with other people, yet have built walls of attitudes around themselves so completely that they are truly alone in a crowd. There are also others who have allowed their anxieties to gradually destroy their social existence. They have caused other persons to find them uninteresting and disappointing as people. It is true that a good friend will very often stand with us firmly through a crisis or through a period of unusual tension or stress. But it is hard to find people who enjoy being with us if we are chronic worriers. If our anxieties are continuous, if we can only solve one problem to fall into another, our friends gradually give up any effort to influence our lives constructively. Thus, there are two kinds of anxieties: those which arise from real causes and those which arise from chronic temperamental tendencies. People are not always anxious because of conditions. Many persons face very difficult situations with comparatively little of the anxiety mechanism. Others in the most trivial circumstances, where nothing of importance is really pending, can become continuously anxious. Like the individual who once said that he was particularly worried at that time because for some reason there did not seem to be anything to worry about. This was a very bad symptom and could lead to some great disaster. Or the person who is so chronically anxious that they regard any peaceful interlude as merely a moment of quiet before a storm. They do not know when the storm is coming or what it will be, but they assume that it will come. Now, of course, most of these people are basically right, but they are right in the wrong way. In the course of life, if we wait long enough, some difficulty will inevitably arise. This can be assumed as factual. We cannot expect to go through life in the continuous presence of the involvements of our present way of life without occasionally having difficult moments. These difficult moments, however, are usually in the minimum. We will have many days, many hours, many weeks, and even years of comparative security before one of these difficult moments, a truly difficult one, suddenly looms over the horizon. Thus, the anxious person is one who has thrown his emphasis on the wrong circumstance pattern in his own life. He has become unable to estimate the relationship between good and bad. He regards anxieties as the high points in his life, and all other instances are merely shadows of very little importance or reality. We have a tendency to regard happiness as unreal and unhappiness as stark reality. We throw all our weight, therefore, into our difficulties and become oblivious to the many privileges, opportunities, and advantages that we enjoy. The anxious person has the tendency and almost the genius to be able to pass through a long series of pleasant interludes without being pleased, without having any sense of fulfillment. He is merely breathlessly waiting for trouble. There is trouble in every life, but we weigh and balance these difficult situations. Now, philosophy enters into the picture, and philosophy points out the possibility of capitalizing on difficulties. In other words, the causes of anxiety are also the sources of instruction. If, however, we have a good melancholy mood, education of this kind does not interest us. We regard all pressure as adversity. Yet if we watch and think, we will realize how much adversity has done for us in comparison to the few things it has done to us. Adversity is challenge, it is opportunity, it is responsibility. It is the privilege of the individual to rise above circumstances and establish his own nature. We find that most people make mistakes joyously and grow painfully. The best things in life that they enjoy most do the least for them, whereas the things which they most fear are their greater benefactors. Philosophy teaches us to weigh these elements, not in the sense of a sour grape acceptance, but in a serious effort to try to learn why problems arise. Anxieties arise either within the temperament or within the environment. If they rise within the temperament, they indicate that there is something basically wrong with ourselves. If they arise in the environment, they may also indicate that there is something wrong with the way in which we manage our affairs, or something wrong with the relationships we hold to other persons. We are making mistakes, usually, if critical situations arise. Now, there are certain cases, of course, where anxiety arises from the most apparently just causes. And it is not probable or likely that the individual will completely free himself from certain worries and doubts and misgivings, but he certainly can reduce them to a minimum. He can certainly recover from the habit of hurting himself needlessly, and a great part of our anxiety mechanism is purely psychological. This may be contrasted, of course, to the worries, the desperate problems that arise when a mother watches a sick child. In a case of this nature, anxiety is almost inevitable. It is a very essential part of our humanity, and we cannot do very much about it. We can only seek faith, consolation, hope in the deepest values that we possess. But such anxieties are more or less in the minimum. Our more constant anxieties are simply our fears of things likely to happen to us, things which we do not want to have happen. And we may gain as great a sense of anxiety out of some trivial thing that we just do not like, as we will suffer from the most devastating natural catastrophe. Nature also provides us with a very interesting type of psychic equipment. Nature is prepared to help the anxious person. If this anxiety is real, if the situations are actually true, and if, as occasionally must happen, we must face some very grave decision or some very difficult situation, nature provides us with certain types of glandular secretions which help us to meet these emergencies. Nature automatically releases the sense of strength in us. One other problem, of course, is that anxiety, like nearly all negative mental and emotional attitudes, requires considerable time allotment. People, in order to be truly anxious, must make sort of a career of it. They must gradually neglect other attitudes. They must even neglect labor or work, or develop such anxiety mechanisms that they are not employable. They must use a great deal of their living time in this pursuit, and gradually they will find that it will encroach upon their sleeping time. They will find that their anxiety disturbs their rest. It further causes various symbolic and psychopathic dreams. It causes the individual to lose his power of relaxation. It causes him to be unable to develop these psychic rest periods, which are very important to us. It is also necessary for the worrier and the anxious person to have his periodic coffee breaks. Unless he finds ways of breaking through his anxieties, he will have very little ability to remedy the condition. Very few emotions or mental attitudes can be cured by simply sitting with them and stewing in them. The individual will find that if he tries a head-on collision with his tendency to be anxious, that he will just simply develop new forms of exhaustion and new anxieties. An important recognition comes from our study of child psychology. Most of our emotions and many of our thoughts are rather childish. They have to be treated as children are treated. One of the things you must never do is let a child believe that you take it too seriously. If you become an obvious servant of your child will become an obvious master of your life. And it is not good for you, and it is not good for the child. Children should not appear to be too important. They should not develop an early sense that their attitudes are likely to affect the climate of the entire family. The child should certainly be important, but it should not gain the sense of its own importance. The same is true of emotional attitudes. Worry is a more or less adolescent or childish emotion. We regard it as a symbol of mature thoughtfulness. We figure that if our faces are all twisted up in a most distorted look of anxiety, that then we are thorough, deep thinking citizens. We are not. We are really rather foolish children. And with the case of anxiety, you get much further by ignoring it than you do by fighting it. Your problem is always to find ways of making it less important, less meaningful, giving it less control over your life. It is not the object of the anxiety that must always receive attention. It is the fact that you are anxious. If you will look back through life, you will observe that you have survived a number of critical situations about which once you were very anxious. You find that many of the most difficult situations that you expect never happen. Others smooth themselves out almost miraculously, and still others perhaps are never completely solved, but they pass into limbo among the half-forgotten things of life. These problems are not always factually as great as they seem to be. In fact, they are seldom in proportion to the anxiety that is bestowed upon them by a chronic worrier. If then we begin to feel that our anxieties are causing us to have too narrow or limited a viewpoint, it is perhaps important to do something about it. One of the more common patterns of this kind is anxiety over children. Now, there are periods in life when this anxiety is reasonably necessary, but most of the anxiety is the result of failure to apply basic principles when they were needed. Our anxieties arise after we have made a series of mistakes ourselves. We have failed to give the necessary companionship. We have failed to understand. We have failed to discipline properly. And gradually the situation reaches a difficult one, in which suddenly it appears that we might have a delinquent on our hands. This would naturally be a cause of grave anxiety. But we must recognize that the anxiety arose probably from a failure to meet problems factually at some previous time. And if we are chronic worriers, we were probably worrying at times when we should have been doing something. And as a result of blind anxiety, we permitted conditions to go uncorrected. But after we reach a certain point in bringing up the young, we observe the increasing need for their own individuality. And we come finally to a condition in which these younger persons must live their own lives. If our anxieties then continue on into the maturity of these young people, we are likely to injure them and hurt ourselves. The reason why most people cling to small thoughts or to familiar thoughts is because they do not have any large ones. They have made small things dominant values. They have allowed comparatively unimportant trivia to become the only excuse for life. Some people honestly believe that if they cannot worry over how their children should bring up their children, there is nothing left in life. I know families in which anxiety reaches a certain peak, and then everybody dashes to the telephone and phones all the relatives to see if they're all right. It has developed around this idea. You don't get a letter every week, telegraph. The person is probably dying. Actually, the person is waiting for the letter you haven't written them for 6 months. But the anxiety patterns do not operate both ways. I know many people who are constantly complaining about their friends for being poor correspondents, and they are the poorest of all themselves. Or else they write letters which no one can read, and which contain a mass of bad news that no one wanted. So anxieties arise from these various causes, but one is the lack of important internal living. The individual who recognizes life to be a calculated risk, and it is from beginning to end, does all that he can to meet these emergencies with the skill of a person playing a good game of chess. Each problem becomes a challenge, and the person who has important things to do is constantly figuring how he can win in this particular challenge. The person with very little to do is the one who is in constant fear of losing. The reason why he is in fear of losing usually is because he does not have enough incentive to drive him to win. Instead of having a clear-cut plan to which he can unite his resources so that he knows step by step what he is doing, he perhaps has a hazy hope of happiness or peace of mind, and having no machinery erected to advance this purpose, having no clear insight as to what he should do next, he is constantly in bewilderment, and bewilderments can easily lead into anxieties. The bewildered person is already 2/3 a worrier by this circumstance alone. So as we go along through life, we will either have worries and anxieties, or else we will have purposes. And these purposes can be very important. I was talking to a very good friend of mine, who was a doctor, not long ago, about a patient. This patient was suffering from an incurable ailment, and the medical profession had decided that probably they had 3 to 6 months to live. This doctor said everything from here on depends upon what this person does with the time allotment that we reasonably presume him to have. According to history of his type of ailment, he has 3 months to 6 months to live. If this crushes him, and he insisted on knowing the truth, if this crushes him, he will live for 3 months, maybe less. If he decides to do all he can while he's alive, he will probably make the 6 months. But now comes something else. It is quite conceivable that under the drive of a tremendous purpose, this individual could live a year, 2 years, or 3 years. We cannot say how long he will live. We gave him 3 months to 6 months. If the shock of what we told him had been great enough, he might have died in the office while we were telling him. He said, we examine people every day and find them in perfect condition, and they're dead within a week. We find someone else, we say, my, you're in pretty bad shape. You better take care of yourself, and this individual may bury us. We don't know. But one thing we do know, namely, that the continuity of purpose in the presence of sickness has a great deal to do with the extension of life. Now, it may not be able to overcome the ailment. The ailment may be too deep-seated, the destruction may be too great. The only thing that we can conceive is the extension of life as the result of attitude. Now, the individual involved in this particular case took a very amazing attitude. Instead of settling back and waiting for the end, this individual decided to travel. They're starting out now on a trip which would normally last a year. They're going out and they're going to go and see the things they've always wanted to see. They're going to interesting places. They're going to forget about the disease. If it catches up with them along the way, that's it. Chances are, as I talk to the doctor again, the chances are they will not only come back, but may extend the trip considerably. It depends on this willingness or this power to rise above our own tendency to the melancholy reflection upon life, which a situation of this kind may cause. There is a well-known case of an important civic leader in this country who also had one of these death sentences thrown upon him by his health. Yet he had a comparatively long term of public office unexpired. The expectancy of his ailment was that he could never live to complete that term of office. He did, because he felt that at the moment he could not be replaced. He had projects for the community good which required the doing. There was no one else to do them, and he did live and complete term of office. and passed on a short time afterward. But he lived to do the thing that he felt had to be done. Now, this positive attitude is very real, and we cannot escape the implication of it. How much more real is it if the person who has very few physical factors against them, whose probabilities of life are normal, who has the right to look forward to 20 or 30 years of more constructive living? With a person of this kind, anxiety and fear and worry will shorten the reasonable expectancies of life. Now, many people are chronic worriers and seem to live a long time. This can happen because human beings are individuals. But statistics lined up and classified and studied will indicate that a life is heavily influenced by its attitudes. And even if physical existence may appear to be prolonged, the individual is not enjoying that existence. It is not meaningful to him. His extension of years is merely a continuation of his misfortunes in his own mind. So the mere blessing of years is not too helpful if many of those years are going to be burdened with such a profound neurosis that nothing valuable can be accomplished. An individual is either growing or rotting. No one is standing still. The status quo is impossible. Everything is either unfolding itself or it is withering away. Negative attitudes do cause this withering. They cause a blight upon all purposes. Positive attitudes do a great deal to improve the probabilities of a happy and successful life. As philosophy helps us in understanding the challenge of living, helps us to recognize law and order, reason and common sense in the things that happen to us, so religion also makes a very important contribution to the anxious person. Most persons whose anxieties have come to be too dominant are truly persons of little faith. The mystic, the idealist, the dreamer, who falls into anxiety simply indicates that he has never experienced what he professes to believe. And here we see, of course, the continual, ageless testing of conviction. We live in a world in which there are many very noble and beautiful convictions, and yet a large percentage of people live badly. This is because these convictions have never actually been applied to self. They have moved upon the surface of the outer mind, but they've never been experienced within consciousness. We do not hold these truths to be applicable to ourselves, and we do not apply them. So in the terms of the anxious person, faith can become a very real and vital factor. There comes a time in the lives of most people when a certain part of their experience must be handed back to the divine power. While things are going relatively well with us, we are masters of all situation, and we give out advice very freely. But when difficulties begin to accumulate and situations are well out of hand, then there is almost inevitably the instinct to seek divine help, to seek the help and strength of some power greater than our own. We are self-sufficient in our pleasures, but we are not self-sufficient in our sorrows.
There's no difference at all.
Thus we turn to some kind of consoling power, some principle, some spiritual energy to assist us in these climatic situations. The psychologist, of course, tells us that this is a psychochemical process by which what we are really doing is calling upon our own unexplored and unexperienced inner resources. That the thing we are really suddenly doing is trying to be ourselves. That we have suddenly recognized the need of the total person to meet the total need. And in this total person, we use the archetype of deity as a symbol of the complete potential of life, whether in ourselves or in the universe. In any event, however we wish to explain it, the individual finds the need for this kind of spiritual consolation. This is one of the reasons why the person with very little understanding of life, very little inner resource, and deficient in the philosophical and spiritual equations of life, has fewer defenses and less support to his consciousness than the idealist. In time of emergency, materialism offers very little to help the person in trouble. Materialism can help him to accumulate things around him, but his needs, when they arise within him, are not met by the materialistic or even the humanistic attitude. The individual needs the sense of the reality of a divine plan. Now, if we do accept that there is a divine principle at the source of life, that this principle is true and real, then it is difficult for us to justify a great many of our own attitudes. If we believe that the universe is good, why do we spend our entire lifetime fearing it? If we believe that God is running the universe, why are we continually fearful lest we be the victims of injustice? If we actually have the conviction in ourselves that this universe is a spiritual being, that within it essential good is always dominant, why are we constantly giving strength to evil and being unaware of this goodness? Why do we consistently live in a state of terror if the world we live in is part of the very nature and substance of God? In religion today, we are inclined more to a mystical approach to this problem. We are inclined more and more to suspect that the divine power at the root of life is good, and that what we call mistakes or evil arise not from this divine power, but from misinterpretation of that power by man himself. That we are ourselves the causes of the various attitudes which we now assume to arise in the divine nature, and that man is full of fear simply because he has never really understood how to be filled with love. His good emotions are not positive enough, not strong enough. And in a very highly commercialized civilization, there seems to be much more incentive to develop selfishness than unselfishness. We are much more inclined to be personal than impersonal. We are much more likely to be possessive than to release people. We are much more likely to see evil than good. Because of this tendency to negation in ourselves, we have lost for the large part the simple consolation of spirit, which simply comes from man's fundamental belief that he lives in a universe of good. A philosopher friend I knew years ago always read the paper in the morning. He was a kindly old gentleman. He always read the paper in the morning because he said it gave him such a new sense of the honesty of God. Well, I know people read it for many reasons, but I doubt if many read it for that purpose. Well, he said, now look, here's a chap that didn't turn in his income tax reports when he should have. He tried to chisel. He kept it up for 4 or 5 years. Now the government's caught up with him. And he's probably going to have a nice fat penalty on his hands. What is more sublime justice than this? It'll be sublime to everyone but the man. And he will probably assume the bottom is out of the universe. He will never realize that it's his own fault. Here we have a world that for thousands of years of recorded history has been breaking every rule known to heaven and earth. So at this time the world is in a very bad shape. This is not injustice, this is justice. This is not the absence of God, this is the presence of divine law. And if it looks as though we're in a pretty bad mess, this mess itself proves that an individual or a nation or a world cannot live badly and be happy. Now this is justice. This isn't tragedy. This isn't a proof that nobody cares and that we're poor little forlorn creatures out in the snow. This is merely a proof that we have created the blizzard ourselves and now we're sitting in it. This is not a proof that evil triumphs. It is a proof that evil cannot triumph. And as we go through these great catastrophes, they are nothing but piling up of individual errors. Millions of persons deserving very little that is good achieve an end in which they get very little that is good. This is disappointing, but it is only disappointing to dishonest people. Why don't we face the fact? If we sow the whirlwind, we will reap the whirlwind. Such was the opinion of Cassandra, the ancient muse of doom. Whatever we do must have its consequences. And it is not right for us to assume at this time that we have earned the golden age. There is no earthly reason why this world in its present state should enjoy peace. If we could live as badly as we have for thousands of years and suddenly come into the ripeness of a magnificent spiritual utopia, then there would be no justice in the universe. And private and personal grudges could be handled on the same basis. In other words, if you live the first half of your life badly enough, you should enjoy all of the charms of a delightful old age. Now, who expects it? No one. History doesn't expect it either. So actually, the stories that we read are the stories of mistakes coming home to roost. They are stories of things done and things undone. They are stories of processes that have been followed and proven wrong. But there is nothing in these stories to prove that there is no God or that there is no justice. These things prove conclusively that the purposes of nature are clear, that if we do not abide by these principles, we will never enjoy the securities which they bestow. We cannot break the law and be happy, but we can keep the law and be happy. So these problems become a little bit theological, but not in the popular sense of the word. They also intimate to us that beneath and behind the visible natures of things, there are rules and patterns and values and ways of judging which are entirely apart from our experience. Some of the things that we think are good and are in trouble probably are not as good as we think they are. And some of the bad things that seem to flourish may not really be bad. But we have a different attitude about these things. We have never brought our own attitudes into harmony with universal law. We have simply assumed that when our adversary flourishes, this is bad. When we ourselves flourish, this is good. The motives, reasons, and circumstances do not interest us. Anxiety, then, arises from man's effort in many instances to force situations which are not essentially valid. If we have something that is essentially not so, we may live to see this thing crumble, fall apart, and if we are too addicted to it, we may crumble with it. For many individuals cannot survive the disintegration of their attitudes. An individual with a very strong dogmatic purpose cannot survive this purpose if it fails. Not because the purpose was good, not because the purpose was bad, but because the individual was completely identified with it. So we fall with the things we believe, and when those things are assailed, we are left disconsolate.